The rain hammered down like bullets from heaven, and Orion McClure stood under the meager shelter of a livery-stable awning, watching a woman work magic with his temperamental stallion in the middle of a thunderstorm that would have sent most men running for cover. She had arrived in Mojave, California 3 weeks earlier, appearing out of the desert heat like a mirage made flesh, and Orion had noticed her immediately because noticing things kept a man alive in these parts. The year was 1876, and the town sat on the edge of civilization, where the Mojave Desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a place where only the stubborn and the desperate tried to carve out a life. Orion had been both at various times in his 32 years. The woman's name was Diana Vaughn, and she had set up shop in the abandoned smithy at the edge of town with nothing but a weathered leather pack and a set of farrier tools that looked older than sin itself. The townspeople whispered about her, naturally. A woman alone in a place like Mojave was unusual enough, but a woman who claimed she could shoe horses better than any man was downright scandalous. Orion had heard the talk in the saloon, seen the way the other ranchers and prospectors shook their heads, and predicted she would be gone within a month, driven out by either failure or the harsh reality of desert life. But here she was, 3 weeks in, standing in a downpour that had blown in from the mountains to the west, her dark hair plastered to her head and her simple cotton dress soaked through, holding his stallion's hoof between her knees with the kind of steady confidence that made Orion's breath catch in his chest. Thunder rolled across the sky like God clearing his throat, and lightning turned the world white for a split second, but Diana's hands never wavered. She drove another nail home with 3 precise strikes of her hammer, the sound barely audible over the roar of the rain. Orion was a big man, 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and bone, hardened by years of living in the high country, trapping and hunting in the Sierra Nevada before drifting down to the desert to try his hand at prospecting. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves that he usually kept tied back with a strip of leather, and his forearms were thick as fence posts from swinging a pickaxe and hauling supplies up mountain trails. He had a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, all hard angles and weathered skin, with eyes the color of storm clouds that most people found difficult to meet for long. Those eyes were fixed on Diana Vaughn now, watching the way she moved with economic grace, no wasted motion, every action purposeful and precise. She had told him earlier that morning that his stallion needed new shoes, that the old ones were worn thin and would split if he tried to ride hard over rocky ground. Orion had been skeptical. The horse was mean, had a reputation for biting and kicking, that had sent 2 different farriers in the last town limping away with bruises and worse. But Diana had simply nodded when he warned her, quoted him a fair price, and told him to bring the animal by that afternoon. Then the storm had rolled in, sudden and violent the way desert storms often were, turning the sky black and unleashing a torrent that turned the dusty streets into rivers of mud. Orion had assumed she would postpone, would send word to come back tomorrow when the weather cleared. Instead, when he arrived at her smithy leading his reluctant stallion through the sheeting rain, he found her standing in the open-sided shelter, her forge already burning hot and her tools laid out in neat rows on a wooden bench. "You don't have to do this now," he had said, raising his voice to be heard over the storm. "It can wait." Diana had looked up at him with eyes the color of honey, flecked with green, and shook her head. "I told you this afternoon, and this afternoon it is. A promise is a promise, Mr. McClure. Weather does not change that." Something in the way she said it, the absolute certainty in her voice, had made him step back and let her work, and now, 20 minutes into the job, he understood that he was witnessing something rare. Diana Vaughn was not just competent. She was extraordinary. The stallion, who had once kicked a man so hard it broke his ribs, stood docile as a lamb while she worked. Diana spoke to the animal in a low, continuous murmur that Orion could not quite make out over the rain, her voice rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed to calm the beast. She had already finished the front hooves, and now she was working on the rear left, the most dangerous position, where a kick could shatter bone or worse. But she moved with absolute confidence, her body positioned just right, her grip on the hoof firm but not harsh. Orion watched her drive the 5th nail, then the 6th, each one placed perfectly, each blow of the hammer striking true despite the water streaming down her face and the wind whipping her soaked dress around her legs. She was not a large woman, maybe 5 feet 6 inches, with a slender build that belied the strength in her arms and back. But there was something about her presence, the way she carried herself, that made her seem immovable as a mountain. The 7th nail went in clean. Then the 8th. Diana rasped the edge of the hoof with quick, expert strokes, checking her work with fingers that seemed to see more than eyes could. Then she gently lowered the stallion's leg, patted his flank and moved to the final hoof. The rain showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was coming down harder now, a wall of water that turned the world gray and formless beyond the shelter of the smithy's roof. Orion stepped closer, drawn by something he could not name. "You learned this from your father?" he asked. Though he had to nearly shout to be heard, Diana glanced up at him as she lifted the stallion's final hoof, and for a moment their eyes met. Something passed between them, a spark of recognition that had nothing to do with previous acquaintance and everything to do with the sudden, fierce awareness that sometimes strikes between two people like lightning from a clear sky. "My husband," she said, and Orion felt his stomach drop. Of course she was married. A woman like this would not be alone unless widowed. And she wore no black mourning clothes that he could see, though with her dress soaked through it, was hard to tell colors in the gloom. Diana seemed to read his expression, or perhaps she was simply used to clarifying. "He died 2 years ago. Cholera outbreak in San Francisco. We had a smithy there, near the docks. He taught me everything he knew before he passed." "I am sorry," Orion said, and meant it. "So am I," Diana replied simply. Then she turned her attention back to the hoof, positioning the first shoe of the final set. But life continues, and a person can either continue with it or lie down and let it roll over them. I chose to keep moving. She struck the first nail, and Orion marveled again at her precision. The storm raged around them, thunder shaking the ground beneath their feet, but her hands remained steady. The second nail, the third. He found himself counting silently, matching the rhythm of her hammer strikes to the beating of his own heart. "What brought you to Mojave?" he asked. "There are bigger towns, places with more business." Diana smiled, a quick flash of white teeth in her rain-darkened face. "That is exactly why I came here. In big towns, a woman farrier is a curiosity maybe, or a joke. Here, people are practical. They care whether their horses are shod well, not whether the person doing it wears trousers or a dress." The 4th nail sank home. The 5th. Orion watched the muscles in her forearms flex with each blow, saw the way she braced her body to take the recoil of the hammer. She was right about the people of Mojave. They were practical, hardened by the desert and the constant struggle to survive in a place that killed the weak without mercy. If Diana could do the job, they would pay her. If she could not, she would starve. It was that simple. But Orion suspected there was more to her choice than mere practicality. Mojave was remote, isolated, the kind of place where a person could disappear if they wanted to, could leave behind old ghosts and start fresh. He understood that impulse. It was what had brought him down from the mountains, driven him to abandon his trap lines and his solitary cabin to seek something new, though he had not yet figured out what that something was. The 6th nail, the 7th. Diana worked with focused intensity now, her entire being concentrated on the task at hand. Orion realized he was holding his breath and forced himself to exhale. The rain drummed on the roof, a constant percussion that seemed to come from inside his own skull. The 8th and final nail went in clean and true, struck home with 3 perfect blows. Diana rasped the edge, tested the fit with expert fingers, then lowered the stallion's hoof and stepped back. The entire job had taken perhaps 30 minutes, and she had not missed a single nail, had not struck a false blow, or hesitated once. Despite working in conditions that would have made most farriers refuse the job entirely, the stallion shook himself, spraying water in all directions, then turned his massive head to look at Diana with what Orion could have sworn was respect. She reached up and scratched between the animal's ears, and the horse leaned into her touch like a cat seeking affection. "He is a good boy," Diana said, her voice softer now that the hammering had stopped. "Just needed someone to treat him with respect instead of fear." Orion stepped forward, reaching for the coin purse at his belt, but Diana waved him off. "Come back when the rain stops and you can see the work in proper light," she said. "If you are satisfied, then, we will settle accounts. No sense in you fumbling with wet money in this mess." It was a reasonable suggestion, but Orion hesitated. He did not want to leave, though he could not have explained why. There was something about standing here in the storm with this remarkable woman that felt right in a way few things in his life ever had. "I could wait it out here," he said. "If you do not mind the company, the rain might ease up soon." Diana looked at him for a long moment, and Orion had the uncomfortable feeling that she was reading him like words on a page, seeing things he barely admitted to himself. Then she nodded slowly. "I do not mind," she said. There is a bench inside, out of the spray, and I have coffee on the stove if you drink it." Orion confirmed, following her deeper into the smithy. The space was larger than it looked from the outside, with a high ceiling that rose into shadow and walls lined with tools hanging from pegs. The forge glowed red in the corner, casting dancing light across the packed earth floor. A small pot-bellied stove sat in the opposite corner with a battered coffee pot perched on top, and next to it stood a simple wooden table with two mismatched chairs. Diana poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to Orion. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and he felt that spark again, stronger this time, like touching a doorknob after walking across a wool carpet. Diana's eyes widened slightly, and he knew she had felt it too. They sat in silence for a while, sipping the strong, bitter coffee and listening to the rain. Orion studied Diana's profile in the firelight, noting the straight line of her nose, the determined set of her jaw, the way her wet hair clung to her neck and shoulders. She was beautiful, he realized, though not in the delicate, porcelain way that men's magazines advertised. Hers was a beauty born of strength and competence, the appeal of someone who could stand on their own 2 feet and face whatever the world threw at them without flinching. "You live up in the high country?" Diana asked eventually, breaking the comfortable quiet. "Used to," Orion replied. "Spent 10 years trapping up in the Sierra Nevada, knew every game trail and water source within 50 miles of my cabin, but it got lonely after a while." A man can only talk to himself for so long before he starts answering back. Diana laughed, a warm sound that made something in Orion's chest loosen. "I imagine so. What brought you down to the desert?" "Figured I would try prospecting for a while. There are still claims to be had if you are willing to work for it. And the town was appealing after so long alone. Found anything worth keeping?" Orion shrugged. "Some color here and there, enough to keep me fed and supplied. I am not looking to get rich. Just trying to figure out what comes next." Diana nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I understand that feeling. After Thomas died, I spent months just going through the motions, doing what needed to be done but not really living. Then one day I woke up and realized I had a choice. I could stay in San Francisco, surrounded by memories and pity, or I could go somewhere new and build something different. So I sold the shop, packed what I could carry, and started looking at maps." "Why Mojave specifically?" "I stuck a pin in the map with my eyes closed," Diana admitted with a small smile. "It landed on needles, but when I got there, the town was too big, too established. Someone told me about Mojave, said it was smaller, wilder. That sounded right to me. So I came here, saw the old smithy sitting empty, and knew this was where I needed to be." Orion understood. There was something about this harsh, unforgiving land that called to certain kinds of people. Not the ones seeking easy fortune or gentle living, but those who needed to test themselves against something real, something that did not lie or flatter or make false promises. The desert was honest in its cruelty, and there was a strange comfort in that. The rain began to ease, the hammering torrent diminishing to a steady downpour, then to a persistent drizzle. The thunder moved east, grumbling away into the distance like a disappointed drunk leaving a saloon. Orion knew he should go, should collect his horse and head back to his small rented room above the general store. But he found himself reluctant to leave the warmth of the smithy, the companionship of this unexpected woman. "I should let you get back to your evening," he said. Though he made no move to stand, Diana met his eyes, and something in her expression made his pulse quicken. "You do not have to go on my account, unless you have somewhere to be nowhere important. Then stay a while longer. The coffee is terrible, but it is hot, and I find I enjoy the conversation." So Orion stayed. They talked as the storm died away, and the desert twilight settled over Mojave, turning the sky purple and gold. Diana told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a shipping merchant who had lost everything in a bad investment and drunk himself to death when she was 15. She spoke of meeting Thomas Vaughn, a farrier 10 years her senior, who had been kind to her when kindness was in short supply, and how she had apprenticed with him, learning the trade because she was good with her hands and he needed the help. Orion shared his own history, though he usually kept such things close to his chest. He talked about being raised by a single mother in a mining camp in Nevada, watching her work herself to exhaustion washing other people's clothes until consumption took her when he was 17. He described the years of drifting, working as a ranch hand, a logger, a buffalo hunter before the herds were decimated, finally settling into trapping because he was tired of being around people and wanted the silence of the high country. The sky had gone full dark by the time Orion finally stood to leave. Diana walked him to the entrance of the smithy, where his stallion waited patiently, seemingly unperturbed by the evening's events. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the air clean and cool, the desert smelling of sage and wet earth. "Thank you for the coffee," Orion said, "and for the work on the horse. I can see it is good even in this light. Come by tomorrow and pay me if you are still satisfied after a day's ride," Diana said. Then she hesitated, biting her lower lip in a gesture that made her look younger, more uncertain. "And if you want more terrible coffee and conversation, my door is open. It gets quiet here in the evenings." Orion felt his heart do something strange in his chest, a flutter like a trapped bird. "I would like that," he said, and was surprised by how much he meant it. He rode home slowly, in no hurry to reach the cramped solitude of his rented room. The stallion moved smoothly beneath him, the new shoes clearly fitted perfectly. But Orion barely noticed. His mind was full of honey-colored eyes and strong, capable hands, the sound of hammer strikes in a storm. The way Diana's laugh had made the smithy feel like home. Sleep did not come easy that night. Orion lay on his narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night, and thought about things he had not allowed himself to consider in years. Companionship, partnership, the possibility of a life that included more than just survival and solitude. He had been alone for so long that he had convinced himself he preferred it, that he was not made for the compromises and complications of sharing space with another person. But Diana Vaughn had shaken something loose in him, cracked open a door he thought he had sealed shut. And the truly terrifying part was that he wanted to walk through it, wanted to see where it led. Even knowing that wanting things had always led to loss in his experience, the next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the sky clean of dust. Orion went about his usual routine, riding out to his claim and working the narrow seam of quartz he had been following for the past month. The labor was hard and repetitive, swinging the pickaxe, hauling rocks, sifting through debris looking for flecks of gold. It usually occupied his mind completely, leaving no room for thoughts beyond the immediate physical demands of the work. Today, though, his attention kept drifting. He found himself thinking about Diana, wondering what she was doing, whether anyone had brought her horses to shoe, if she was thinking about him the way he was thinking about her. It was absurd. They had spent a few hours together, shared some coffee and conversation. That was all. It meant nothing, could lead nowhere, except it could. That was the terrifying, exhilarating truth. It could lead somewhere if he let it, if he was brave enough to reach for it. By mid-afternoon, Orion had given up any pretense of productive work. He cleaned his tools, secured the claim site, and rode back into town. He stopped at the general store, where he purchased a small bag of decent coffee beans, the kind that cost more than he usually spent but were worth it. Then he headed for the smithy, his heart hammering harder than it had any right to. Diana was working when he arrived, shaping a piece of hot iron on her anvil with ringing blows. She wore a leather apron over her dress and had her hair tied back with a strip of cloth. Sparks flew with each strike of her hammer, and sweat gleamed on her face in the forge light. She looked up when his shadow fell across the doorway, and the smile that spread across her face made every anxious moment of the morning worth it. "Mr. McClure," she said, setting down her hammer, "I was hoping you would come by." "The shoes are perfect," Orion said, holding up the bag of coffee. "Figured I owed you payment and maybe a contribution to improving the quality of refreshments." Diana laughed and wiped her hands on a rag. "You are a man of discernment. Come in, sit down, let me just bank this fire and I will be right with you." They fell into an easy routine after that. Orion found reasons to visit the smithy most days, sometimes with legitimate need for repairs or supplies, sometimes with only the flimsiest of excuses. Diana always welcomed him, and they would sit and talk for hours, sharing stories and silences, learning the contours of each other's lives. Orion discovered that Diana had a sharp wit and a stubborn streak a mile wide, that she read voraciously despite books being hard to come by in Mojave, that she could swear like a sailor when a piece of metal refused to cooperate with her vision. Diana learned that Orion was quieter than he seemed, that he observed everything and forgot nothing, that he had a dry sense of humor that snuck up on a person. She discovered that he was unfailingly honest, sometimes to the point of bluntness, and that he had a protective instinct that showed itself in small ways, like making sure she had enough firewood stacked before a cold night, or mentioning casually that a particular prospector had a reputation for causing trouble, so she should be careful if he brought his horse around. The town noticed, of course. Mojave was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and the sight of Orion McClure's horse tied outside Diana Vaughn's smithy every evening became a source of speculation and gossip. Some folks thought it was sweet, a lonely man and a widow finding comfort in each other. Others disapproved, thought it was too soon, too improper, that Diana should observe a longer mourning period. Orion did not care what they thought, and Diana seemed equally unbothered. They had found something rare and valuable in each other, a connection that transcended the normal rules and timelines. But neither of them spoke it aloud. The word love remained unmentioned, hovering between them like something precious and fragile that might shatter if acknowledged too directly. 3 months after that first meeting in the storm, things changed. Orion arrived at the smithy one evening to find Diana sitting on the bench outside, staring at nothing, her hands clenched in her lap. He knew immediately that something was wrong. He dismounted and approached slowly, the way he would a spooked animal. "Diana? What happened?" She looked up at him and he saw that she had been crying. Diana Vaughn, who faced down mean horses and skeptical customers and the harsh realities of desert life without flinching, had tears streaking her face. "I got a letter today," she said, her voice tight, "from my husband's brother in San Francisco. He is contesting the sale of the smithy, claiming I did not have the right to sell it because it was Thomas's property, not mine. He is demanding I return the money or he will take me to court." Orion felt rage bloom hot in his chest. "That is nonsense. You were Thomas's wife. The property was yours. We were married, yes, but the deed was in his name only. I never thought to change it because I never imagined he would die, that I would need to prove ownership." Diana pressed her hands to her face. "I spent almost all the money from the sale to get here and set up the shop. I do not have enough to pay him back, and if he takes me to court, I will have to go back to San Francisco, hire a lawyer I cannot afford. I could lose everything." Orion knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. They were trembling, and he squeezed gently, trying to transfer some of his strength to her. "How much does he want?" $2,000. It was a staggering sum, more money than most people in Mojave saw in 5 years. Orion had maybe $300 saved from his prospecting, enough to keep him going through the winter but nowhere near what Diana needed. "We will figure this out," he said firmly. "You are not going to lose everything. I will not let that happen." Diana shook her head, pulling her hands away. "This is not your problem, Orion. I appreciate your friendship, but I cannot ask you to help with this. It is too much. You are not asking, I am offering. We have time to come up with the money. The letter says I have 60 days before he files suit." 60 days. 2 months to find $2,000 in a desert town where most people survived on hope and hard work. It seemed impossible. But Orion had faced impossible odds before and come out alive. He was not about to give up on Diana now. Over the next few days, Orion considered every option he could think of. He could not borrow the money, had no collateral for a loan that size. He could sell his mining claim, but it would fetch maybe a few $100s at most, not nearly enough. He thought about going back to the high country, trapping through the winter and selling the furs. But there was no guarantee of success, and the timeline was too tight. Then he remembered a conversation he had overheard in the saloon a few weeks back. A group of miners had been talking about a big strike they had heard rumors of, a rich vein of silver in the hills north of town. They had dismissed it as probably exaggerated, maybe even a complete fiction, but Orion had filed the information away the way he filed away everything, storing it against possible future need. He spent 2 days riding north, searching the areas the miners had mentioned, looking for signs that someone had been digging. On the 3rd day, he found it, a narrow canyon with fresh tailings outside a shallow shaft, the kind of hasty excavation that spoke of someone working alone. Trying to keep their discovery secret, Orion approached carefully, calling out to announce his presence. A young man emerged from the shaft, barely 20, with wild eyes and a rifle in his hands. They talked, Orion using the calm, patient tone he had learned from years of dealing with frightened animals and suspicious strangers. Eventually he learned the story. The young man, whose name was Charlie, had indeed struck silver, a vein so rich it made his hands shake to think about it. But he was alone, inexperienced, and terrified that claim jumpers would kill him for the location before he could file proper papers and get it registered. Orion made a proposition. He would help Charlie work the claim, would guard it, and provide the experience Charlie lacked in processing ore. In exchange, he wanted half the proceeds from the first major sale, with a cap of $2,000. After that, the claim was all Charlie's. Charlie agreed so quickly it made Orion wonder if he had undervalued his offer, but he did not care. He was not looking to get rich. He just needed enough to save Diana. For the next 7 weeks, Orion worked harder than he had ever worked in his life. He spent his days in the mine, swinging a pickaxe in cramped tunnels, hauling ore to the surface, standing guard at night with his rifle across his knees. He rode into Mojave once a week to check on Diana, to bring her what money he could spare for supplies, to assure her that he had a plan even though he could not yet explain what it was. Diana did not ask for details. He seemed to understand that Orion needed to do this his own way. But he could see the worry eating at her, the way she grew thinner and more drawn as the deadline approached. She had stopped eating properly, was working herself to exhaustion trying to earn every penny she could. It made Orion push harder, work longer hours, drive himself past the point of exhaustion because failure was not an option. The silver was everything Charlie had claimed, incredibly rich, and within 6 weeks they had extracted enough high-grade ore to make a sale. Orion rode with Charlie to the assay office in Needles, stood guard while the ore was weighed and tested, and watched the assayer's eyes go wide when he announced the value, $4,800. Charlie tried to give Orion half the full amount, but Orion refused, taking only the $2,000 they had agreed upon. It was more money than he had ever held at one time, a fortune that could change his life if he kept it. But it was not his to keep. It belonged to Diana, to her future, to the chance at happiness they both deserved. He rode back to Mojave through the night, pushing his stallion hard, arriving as the sun rose on the 58th day since Diana had received the letter. He found her at the smithy, already working despite the early hour, and the relief on her face when she saw him nearly broke his heart. "I have it," he said, dismounting and pulling the heavy leather pouch from his saddlebag. $2,000. You can pay off the brother, keep your shop, stay here. Diana stared at the money, then at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Orion, where did you get this? What did you do?" "Nothing illegal," he assured her. "I helped a young prospector with a silver claim. This was my share. It is yours now." "I cannot take this. It is too much. You earned it." "I earned it for you," Orion said firmly. "Diana, I did not spend the last 2 months breaking my back in a mine shaft because I enjoy hard labor. I did it because you needed help and I could provide it. Please, just take the money. Pay off the brother. End this nightmare." Diana's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I will pay you back, every penny. I do not know how long it will take, but I swear I will. I do not want you to pay me back. Orion, it is $2,000. I cannot just accept that as a gift, then accept it as an investment," he said. "In your shop, in your future, here in Mojave, in us, if there is an us." The words hung in the air between them, the first open acknowledgement of what had been growing for months. Diana looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she set the money down carefully on the workbench and closed the distance between them. "There is an us," she said quietly. "There has been since you stood in the rain watching me work and did not tell me I was crazy for shoeing a horse in a storm. I have just been afraid to say it." "Why afraid?" "Because I lost Thomas and it nearly destroyed me. The idea of caring that much again, of risking that kind of pain, terrifies me." Orion cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs brushing away the tears that had escaped, despite her efforts to contain them. "I am terrified too. I have spent most of my adult life alone because it felt safer than letting anyone get close. But Diana, I would rather have 1 year with you, 1 month, 1 day, than a lifetime of safety and solitude. You are worth the risk." She kissed him then, rising on her toes to press her lips to his, and Orion felt the world narrow to just this moment, this woman, this perfect alignment of everything he had been searching for, without knowing it. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then Diana's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something hungry and desperate. Months of wanting poured into a single point of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Orion rested his forehead against hers and laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised him with its intensity. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "To there being an us?" "That is a yes," Diana confirmed, "though I am still paying you back for the money. We will argue about that later. Right now, I just want to stand here and hold you." So they did, wrapped in each other's arms as the morning sun climbed higher, and the sounds of Mojave waking up drifted through the open walls of the smithy. For the first time in longer than Orion could remember, he felt at peace, like all the wandering years had been leading to this exact spot. This exact woman. Diana sent the money to Thomas's brother the next day, along with a letter from the town lawyer confirming that the sale had been legal and proper, and that any further harassment would be met with legal action. The brother, apparently recognizing that his bluff had been called, backed down. The threat dissolved like morning mist, leaving Diana free to focus on her business and her future. A future that now explicitly included Orion. They did not rush into anything despite the intensity of their feelings. Both had been married before, understood that building a life together required more than just desire and good intentions. They took time to learn each other's rhythms and habits, to navigate the small conflicts that arose when two independent people tried to merge their lives. Diana was stubborn and hated asking for help, even when she needed it. Orion had a tendency to go silent when he was upset, withdrawing into himself instead of talking things through. They argued about money, about Diana's insistence on paying Orion back despite his protests that it was not necessary. They disagreed about whether Diana should expand her business or keep it small and manageable, about whether Orion should continue prospecting or look for more stable work. But they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise and communicate, and the good moments far outweighed the difficult ones. Orion loved watching Diana work, the focus and skill she brought to her craft. Diana loved the way Orion listened to her, really listened, treating her opinions and ideas with respect even when he disagreed. They loved the quiet evenings spent reading by lamplight, the long conversations that ranged across every topic imaginable, the way their bodies fit together when they finally took that step and became lovers in truth as well as name. 6 months after the crisis with Thomas's brother, Orion asked Diana to marry him. He did it without fanfare or elaborate planning, simply asking one night as they sat outside the smithy watching the stars emerge. Diana said yes immediately, then laughed at his expression of pleased surprise. "Did you think I would say no?" she asked. "I hoped you would say yes, but I have learned not to take good things for granted." They were married by the town minister a month later, in a simple ceremony attended by half of Mojave's population. Diana wore a dress of dark blue cotton, the nicest thing she owned, and Orion wore clean trousers and a white shirt, his long hair freshly washed and tied back. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived, and Orion slipped a simple gold band on Diana's finger, a ring he had commissioned from a jeweler in Needles using gold he had panned himself. The townspeople threw them a celebration afterward, a potluck dinner, and dance in the street outside the saloon. There was music and food and more whiskey than was strictly wise, and for one night Mojave forgot about the harshness of desert life and simply celebrated the joy of two people finding each other against improbable odds. Orion and Diana spent their wedding night in a small house Orion had been fixing up for the past month, a 2-room adobe structure on the edge of town with a view of the desert stretching away to the Purple Mountains. It was not much, but it was theirs, bought with Orion's prospecting money and improved by his own hands. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning the landscape of each other's bodies with reverent attention. Afterward, Diana lay with her head on Orion's chest, tracing lazy patterns on his skin, and wondered aloud how she had gotten so lucky. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Orion said, his voice rumbling under her ear. "You made your own fortune by being brave enough to come here, to build a life on your own terms. I am just fortunate that you let me be part of it." "We are both fortunate," Diana said, "and I intend to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that fortune." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Diana continued to run her smithy, building a reputation that spread beyond Mojave. Ranchers came from 50 miles away to have their horses shod by the woman who never missed a nail, even in a storm. Orion worked his prospecting claim during the day but always made it home by evening, unwilling to spend nights away from Diana unless absolutely necessary. Money was tight, but they managed. Diana's business grew steadily, and Orion brought in enough gold dust to cover what her earnings could not. They lived simply, their pleasures small and domestic, shared meals, evening walks, quiet conversations, the comfort of sleeping beside someone you trusted completely. A year into their marriage, Diana discovered she was pregnant. She told Orion over breakfast, simply and directly, watching his face for his reaction. He went very still for a moment, a dozen emotions flickering across his features too quickly to name. Then a smile spread across his face, slow and wondering. "A baby," he said, testing the words. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" Diana asked, suddenly uncertain. They had not explicitly discussed children, though she had assumed he would want them eventually. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Orion said. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her with careful tenderness, as if she might break. I am terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed, but yes, I am happy. So happy. The pregnancy was not easy. Diana suffered terrible morning sickness for the first 4 months, barely able to keep food down. Orion took over the cooking, learning through trial and error to make simple, bland foods that Diana's stomach could tolerate. He also quietly took on more of the work at the smithy, helping with the heavy lifting and the tasks that required strength over precision. Diana hated being coddled, but had to admit she needed the help. Her body was changing in ways that made her usual work difficult, her balance shifting, her stamina decreasing. She had always prided herself on her independence, and pregnancy felt like a betrayal of that self-sufficiency. But Orion never made her feel weak or incapable. He simply did what needed doing, no fuss or commentary, supporting her without diminishing her. The baby came in late spring, a long and difficult labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Orion stayed with Diana the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement when she was certain she could not endure another minute. The midwife, a sturdy woman named Agnes who had delivered half the babies in Mojave, managed the medical aspects with brisk efficiency. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and howling, Orion felt tears streaming down his face. He had seen birth before, had helped animals give birth on the ranch and in the wild, but nothing had prepared him for the overwhelming rush of love and terror he felt, looking at this tiny, perfect creature that he and Diana had created. Diana, exhausted and pale, reached for the baby with shaking arms. Agnes placed the infant on her chest, and Diana's face transformed, all the pain and fatigue falling away as she looked at their son. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "He looks like you," Orion said, touching one tiny waving hand with his finger. The baby gripped it reflexively, and Orion felt his heart contract. They named him Oliver, after Orion's grandfather, a man he had barely known but who his mother had spoken of with love and respect. Oliver McClure came into the world fighting and did not stop. He was a colicky baby, prone to tears and upset, sleeping only in short bursts that left Diana and Orion stumbling through their days in an exhausted haze. But even in the hardest moments, when Oliver had been screaming for hours and nothing seemed to soothe him, Orion would not have traded it for anything. He learned to walk the floor with his son cradled against his chest, learned the specific rhythm of swaying that sometimes calmed the baby, learned to function on 3 hours of broken sleep. Diana recovered slowly from the birth, her strength returning in increments. Orion took over running the smithy for the first month, managing the simpler jobs and turning away the more complex ones with apologies and promises that Diana would be back soon. The townspeople were understanding, most of them having been through the challenges of new parenthood themselves. When Diana finally returned to work, they established a new routine. Orion built a cradle that could sit near the forge, and Diana worked with one eye on Oliver, ready to stop the moment he needed her. Orion adjusted his prospecting schedule to be home during Diana's busiest hours, ready to take Oliver if needed. It was exhausting and chaotic, and some days they were so tired they could barely speak to each other. But they were building something together, a life and a family, and that made the difficult days worthwhile. Oliver grew into a sturdy toddler, with Orion's dark hair and Diana's honey-colored eyes. He was fearless and curious, constantly getting into things he should not touch, testing every boundary they set. Orion worried constantly about keeping him safe, while Diana worried about not stifling his natural curiosity. They argued about discipline and freedom, about whether Oliver should be allowed to spend time in the smithy or whether it was too dangerous. "He needs to learn to respect tools and fire," Diana argued. "Keeping him away will only make him more curious." "He is 2 years old," Orion countered. "He does not have the judgment to be around hot metal and sharp edges." "Then we teach him. We supervise closely and we teach him. That is what my husband did with me." In the end, they compromised. Oliver could be in the smithy under strict supervision, learning to observe and respect the work, but he was not allowed to touch any tools or come within 5 feet of the forge. Diana crafted a special low bench where he could sit and watch, and Orion built a wooden gate across the entrance to keep him from wandering in unsupervised. The system worked. Oliver learned to be careful, to listen when his parents said something was dangerous, to appreciate the skill and craft of his mother's work. And Orion learned to ease up on his protective instincts, to trust that Diana knew what she was doing when it came to balancing safety and education. When Oliver was 3, Diana became pregnant again. This time, armed with experience and realistic expectations, they approached it with less panic and more preparation. The pregnancy was easier than the first, Diana's body seeming to remember what to do. She worked up until a week before the birth, then delivered their second son, a boy they named Thomas, after Diana's first husband, Orion, had suggested the name, and Diana had cried when he offered it, understanding the generosity and security in his choice. He was not threatened by her past, did not need to erase Thomas's memory to feel secure in their marriage. Thomas Vaughn had been important to Diana, had taught her skills that allowed her to survive and thrive. Honoring that by giving their son his name felt right, Thomas was an easier baby than Oliver, calmer and more content. Where Oliver had been all sharp edges and fierce demands, Thomas was mellow and adaptable. The brothers were different as night and day, but they adored each other from the start. Life fell into a rhythm, busy and full and occasionally overwhelming, but fundamentally good. The smithy thrived, Diana's reputation growing to the point where she sometimes had to turn away work or schedule it weeks in advance. Orion gave up prospecting, finding steadier income working as a guide for hunting parties, and occasionally hiring on for big construction projects that needed skilled labor. They saved money slowly but steadily, planning for the future, for the boys' education, for the eventual expansion of the house that would be necessary as Oliver and Thomas grew. They were not rich, would never be rich, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. The boys grew up healthy and strong, running wild through the streets of Mojave with the other children, learning to ride horses almost before they could walk, soaking up the harsh lessons of desert life. Oliver was the bold one, always climbing higher, running faster, testing limits. Thomas was quieter, more thoughtful, content to observe and analyze before acting. Orion taught them to track and hunt, to read the desert's moods and respect its dangers. Diana taught them the value of skilled work, the satisfaction of creating something useful with your own hands. Together they tried to instill honesty, courage, and kindness, though they knew that ultimately the boys would become whoever they were meant to be, shaped by forces beyond parental control. When Oliver was 10 and Thomas 7, a man rode into Mojave asking questions about Orion McClure. He was a federal marshal, and he was looking for information about a series of robberies that had occurred in the high country 5 years earlier. Someone had mentioned Orion's name, suggested he might know something about the areas where the robberies had taken place. Orion cooperated fully, answering the marshal's questions honestly. He had been in the area during the relevant time, but he had been trapping, not robbing stages. He provided details about his trap lines, the locations of his camps, even offered to take the marshal up to his old cabin if it would help establish his whereabouts. The marshal, a weathered man named Jenkins, seemed satisfied. "I did not think you were involved," he admitted, "but I had to follow up, you understand." "I understand," Orion said, "a man doing his job." What he did not understand, not until later, was that Diana had been terrified the entire time. She had not said anything while Jenkins was there, had maintained a calm facade, but after he left, she collapsed into a chair, shaking. "I thought he was going to arrest you," she said, her voice tight. "I thought he was going to take you away and I would lose you." Orion knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Diana, I have done nothing wrong. I had no reason to worry. But you do not know that. You do not know what someone might have said, what false accusation they might have made. Innocent men get convicted all the time." He realized then how deeply the fear of loss still lived in her, buried but never truly gone. Losing Thomas had marked her in ways that time could not fully erase. The possibility of losing Orion, of her life being shattered again, was a terror she carried silently. "I am not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I am here with you and the boys, and that is where I am staying. The marshal was just doing his job, and he is satisfied. It is over." Diana nodded, but Orion could see she was not entirely reassured. He spent the rest of the evening staying close, making sure she knew he was there, solid and present and not going anywhere. That night, after the boys were asleep, Diana asked him about his life before Mojave in more detail than she ever had before. Orion told her everything, holding nothing back. The desperate poverty of his childhood, the violence he had witnessed in mining camps and railroad towns, the time he had been jumped by claim jumpers and had fought 3 men with nothing but a knife and sheer determination to survive. He told her about the loneliness of the mountain years, the way silence could drive a man half mad, the reasons he had abandoned that life to come to the desert, and he told her that meeting her had saved him in ways he was still discovering, that she and the boys were the only family he had ever really had, the only home that had ever mattered. Diana listened to all of it, then pulled him close and held on tight. "We are your family," she said, "and you are ours. Whatever comes, we face it together." The years continued to pass, marked by small triumphs and minor tragedies, the ordinary texture of a well-lived life. Oliver broke his arm falling from a horse and bore it stoically, earning his father's pride. Thomas discovered a love of reading and burned through every book in Mojave's small lending library, then started ordering more from San Francisco with money he earned doing odd jobs. Diana's hair started to show threads of silver, and Orion's body accumulated the aches and pains of hard labor. They were getting older, settling into middle age with the same determination they brought to everything else. When Oliver was 16, he announced he wanted to join the cavalry, wanted to see more of the world than Mojave in the desert. Orion's first instinct was to forbid it, to keep his son close and safe. But Diana reminded him that they had raised Oliver to be brave and independent, and they could not now punish him for becoming what they had taught him to be. So, Orion gave his blessing, though it hurt more than he expected. He watched Oliver ride away toward the recruiting station in Los Angeles and felt like a piece of his heart was leaving with him. "He will be fine," Diana said, standing beside him with her hand in his. "We raised him well. He knows how to take care of himself." "I know. That does not make it easier." "No. But we still have Thomas, and we have each other, and Oliver will come home when he can. We have not lost him." She was right. Oliver wrote regularly, his letters full of details about cavalry life, the training and the travel and the camaraderie of the service. He was thriving, growing into the man he was meant to be, and Orion could not regret that. Even though he missed his son fiercely, Thomas stayed in Mojave, showing no interest in leaving. He apprenticed with Diana, learning the farrier trade with the same focused intensity she had brought to it. He had inherited her eye for precision and her stubborn refusal to settle for anything less than perfection. Diana glowed with pride every time she watched him work, seeing her skills and knowledge living on in her son. When Oliver's enlistment ended 4 years later, he returned to Mojave bronzed and lean and full of stories. He had seen parts of the country Orion had only read about, had fought in minor skirmishes along the border, had learned things about himself that only testing could reveal. He was 20 now, a man fully grown, and Orion had to adjust to relating to him as an adult rather than a child. It was strange and sometimes uncomfortable, but also deeply satisfying. Oliver had turned out well, brave and honest and capable. Orion could not have asked for more. Oliver announced he was not re-enlisting, that he had gotten the wandering out of his system and wanted to come home. He took a job at one of the larger ranches outside town, working as a wrangler and occasional scout. Within a year he married a rancher's daughter named Sarah, a smart, capable woman who reminded Orion of Diana in all the best ways. The wedding was a joyous occasion, the whole town turning out to celebrate. Orion stood beside Diana watching their son exchange vows, and felt the strange vertigo of time's passage. It seemed like just yesterday that Oliver had been a red-faced infant in his arms, and now here he was, starting a family of his own. "We are getting old," he murmured to Diana. "Speak for yourself," she replied with a grin. "I feel exactly the same as I did 20 years ago. It was a lie, of course." They both felt the weight of years, the accumulated wear of lives lived fully and without regret. But they were healthy and still in love, still partners in every sense of the word, and that was enough. Thomas married a few years later to a schoolteacher named Anne who had come to Mojave to educate the town's children. She was quiet and bookish, perfect for Thomas's contemplative nature. They built a small house next to the smithy, planning to take over Diana's business when she was ready to retire. Orion was 61 and Diana 58 when they became grandparents for the first time. Oliver and Sarah had a daughter, a tiny red-haired bundle they named Diane after her grandmother. Orion held his granddaughter and felt the circle of life complete itself, the continuity of family stretching forward into a future he would not see but had helped to build. Diana cried when she held little Diane, overcome with emotion she could not quite name. "I never thought I would have this," she said. "After Thomas died, I thought my chance at family was over. But look at what we have built, Orion. Look at all of this." Orion looked at his wife, at their sons and daughters-in-law, at the grandchild in Diana's arms, and felt a satisfaction so deep it was almost painful. They had built something rare and precious, a family rooted in love and respect and mutual support. It had not been easy, had required work and compromise, and the willingness to keep trying even when things were hard. But it had been worth it, every difficult moment, every sacrifice. Thomas and Anne had twin boys a year later, rambunctious and loud, and the house was suddenly full of children's laughter again. Orion and Diana settled into grandparenthood with the same determination they brought to everything, spoiling the grandchildren shamelessly and returning them to their parents when they got too wild. Diana finally retired from the smithy when she was 62, her hands too stiff with arthritis to do the precision work she demanded of herself. Thomas took over completely, running the business with Anne's help when she was not teaching. Diana struggled with the transition, unused to being idle, but Orion kept her occupied with projects and travel. They took a trip to San Francisco, Diana's first time back since she had left nearly 40 years earlier. The city had grown enormously, transformed by the railroad and the continuing influx of people seeking fortune. Diana stood on the docks where her first husband's smithy had been, now replaced by a warehouse, and felt only a distant sadness, like looking at something through a window. "I am glad we came," she told Orion, "but I am more glad we are leaving. This is not my home anymore. Maybe it never really was. Home is Mojave with you." They returned to the desert, to the small house they had shared for so many years, and settled into the final phase of their life together. Orion's body was failing in small ways, his knees aching, his vision fading. Diana's arthritis worsened, her hands becoming gnarled and painful. But they faced these indignities together, helping each other through the difficult days, celebrating the good ones. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their sons threw them a celebration that brought half the town to their yard. There was food and music and speeches, people sharing stories of how Orion and Diana had touched their lives over the years. Orion was embarrassed by the attention, uncomfortable being the center of focus, but Diana glowed, delighted by the recognition. 40 years, she said that night as they lay in bed listening to the desert wind. "It does not seem possible. It feels like we just met yesterday." "Some days it does," Orion agreed. "Other days it feels like I have known you my entire life." "Do you have any regrets?" Diana asked. "Anything you wish had been different?" Orion thought about it carefully, giving the question the consideration it deserved. "I regret the years before I met you," he said finally. "All that time spent alone, convincing myself I did not need anyone. But everything after that first storm, watching you shoe my horse in the rain, I would not change a single moment." Diana rolled over to face him, her eyes bright even in the darkness. "I love you, Orion McClure. I have loved you since the day you stayed and watched me work when anyone else would have left. I will love you until the day I die, and probably after, if such things are possible." "They are possible," Orion said, pulling her close. "If love this strong can exist at all, then it can exist beyond death, I am certain of it." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the way they had for 40 years, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life of meaning and purpose. Orion died first, 3 years later, his heart giving out peacefully in his sleep. He was 76 years old, had lived longer than he had any right to expect given the hardships of his early life. Diana woke beside him, knew immediately that he was gone, and felt her own heart crack but not break. She had known this day would come, had prepared for it as much as anyone could prepare for such loss. She mourned him deeply and honestly, weeping for the loss but also celebrating the extraordinary gift of 43 years together. Their sons helped her through the worst of it, and the grandchildren, now grown with children of their own, surrounded her with love and support. Diana lived another 5 years, staying in the small house, keeping Orion's things around her like touchstones of memory. She was 83 when she died, peaceful and ready, her hand clutching a photograph of Orion from their wedding day. They buried her next to him in the Mojave cemetery, under a simple stone that read, "Diana Vaughn McClure, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She never missed a single nail." The town remembered them for generations afterward. The mountain man and the farrier who had found each other in a storm and built something beautiful in the harsh desert. Their story became part of Mojave's folklore, told to children as an example of what was possible when two people were brave enough to reach for love despite their fears. The smithy continued to operate for another 50 years under Thomas's descendants, a testament to Diana's skill and legacy. And every time someone in Mojave spoke of dedication or excellence or the kind of love that endured all hardships, they thought of the day Diana Vaughn shoed a temperamental stallion in a thunderstorm, never missing a single nail, while Orion McClure watched and fell in love. It had been the beginning of everything, that storm, the moment when two lonely people recognized in each other the possibility of something more. And from that recognition, they had built a life of purpose and meaning, filled with love and family, and the satisfaction of work well done. their great-grandchildren scattered across California and beyond, carrying forward the values Orion and Diana had instilled. Honesty, courage, the willingness to take risks for the people you loved, the importance of skill and craft and doing things right, even when it was difficult. The understanding that love was not something that happened to you, but something you built, day by day through choice and effort and determination. The house where they had lived eventually fell into disrepair and was torn down, replaced by newer structures. The smithy was converted to other purposes as automobiles replaced horses and the need for farriers diminished. Mojave itself changed, growing and shrinking with the times, transforming from a rough desert outpost into a more modern town. But the story remained, passed down through families, told in slightly different versions, but always containing the essential truth. A woman who could shoe a horse in a thunderstorm without missing a nail. A mountain man who watched her work and recognized something worth staying for. The love they built together despite loss and fear and the thousand small obstacles that stood between them and happiness. It was a story about the power of competence and courage, about two people who refused to let circumstances define their lives. It was about the way love could grow in the harshest environments if you were willing to tend it carefully. And it was about the legacy that remained when two people lived authentically, creating a family and a community that carried their values forward long after they were gone. In the end, Orion and Diana's story was not unusual in its particulars. People fell in love, married, raised families, grew old together in every town and every time. What made their story special was the way they approached it, the intention and care they brought to building their life together, the refusal to settle for less than they deserved, the courage to keep choosing each other every single day. On quiet nights in Mojave, when the wind blew across the desert and the stars blazed overhead in the clear, dry air, old-timers still sometimes told the story of Orion and Diana. They spoke of the thunderstorm and the perfectly shod horse, the way two solitary people found each other and created something beautiful in an unforgiving land. And in the telling, the story became more than just history. It became a reminder of what was possible, a testament to the enduring power of love and work, and the stubborn determination to build something meaningful in a world that often seemed designed to tear such things apart. The desert remembered them in the way deserts remember everything, holding their story in the same ancient landscape that had witnessed their lives. The mountains stood eternal witness. The sky that had once poured rain while Diana worked continued to stretch endless and blue. And somewhere in the fabric of that place, Orion and Diana's love remained, a permanent thread woven into the tapestry of Mojave's history, inspiring new generations to reach for love with both hands and hold on tight, no matter what storms might come.